Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled MIPS 101, an introduction to the merit-based incentive payment system for new participants. Today's presenter is Bruce Mackey, Alterum's Regulatory and Incentive Program Analyst. My name is Liz Jones, and I am today's moderator. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to touch on. A PDF copy of today's slides can be downloaded right now from your GoToWebinar interface. We will be keeping everyone muted during today's presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the questions box in your GoToWebinar interface, and we will address it during the Q&A. Because of the large number of attendees for today's webinar, we may not have time to answer all of the questions. If we do not address yours during today's broadcast, you will receive an answer through email. Also, a link to the recording of this presentation will be available soon on the homepage of our website at www.qppresourcecenter.org. Today, Bruce will provide a brief overview of the Quality Payment Program and its two paths of participation. From there, he will spend the rest of his time discussing the various aspects of the merit-based incentive payment system, including general timelines, eligibility and exemption criteria, reporting options, important information in each of the MIPS performance categories, as well as the annual performance threshold and subsequent payment adjustments. Following the presentation, he will take time to answer any questions posed by the attendees. Please note, the information you will hear in this broadcast is current as of today and is only intended to be a general summary. With that, I will turn things over to Bruce.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, everybody, for joining me today to go over MIPS 101 deck I designed to be sort of an introduction to the MIPS path. We have a whole bunch of new participants that are now getting pulled into this program, and so I thought I'd kind of take things back to the beginning and kind of build that program knowledge from the ground up. So with that, let's dive right in. What we're here talking about today is the Quality Payment Program. Overall, the QPP was embedded. It was one component of MACRA, or the Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act of 2015, which required CMS to implement the law, CMS required by law to implement this incentive program called the QPP, or Quality Payment Program. Overall, what it was designed to do was to repeal the very flawed Sustainable Growth Rate, or SGR. If that had been left in place, we were going to see some very significant reductions in Medicare payments to the providers. So we were all very happy to see the SGR go away. Overall, really what it's trying to do is change the way that Medicare pays clinicians and establishes this new framework to reward clinicians for value over volume. Ultimately, what we're doing is getting rid of fee-for-service payments. That is sort of that long-term goal, or at least shrink fee-for-service payments to be the smallest method by which clinicians are getting paid. Right now, it is probably the biggest. So we're trying to kind of flip that model and really start, really stop paying all clinicians the exact same amount. Right now, whether you're a great doctor or a mediocre doctor or a terrible clinician, you're all getting paid the same amount for each service. This system changes that. It starts to now reward value over volume. So the better you are, the higher the quality and lower the cost, the better your reimbursement rate is going to be under this system. Within the QPP, there are two different paths that you can participate in. Path one is MIPS, or the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System. And then the other path is advanced APMs, or alternative payment models. We are going to be talking today about MIPS, as that is the path where the vast majority of clinicians are still participating. Over time, CMS is hoping to transition more clinicians from the MIPS path over to that advanced APM path. So that is the long-term goal, but I think it's going to take us some time to get there. So for now, the vast majority of clinicians will be in path one, the MIPS path. So overall, I want to kind of paint a picture for MACRA, just give you this conceptual diagram for what MACRA is. So MACRA was a huge piece of legislation. There was a lot of regulatory changes that we are not talking about today. One of the components of MACRA is the QPP. Within the QPP, there are those two paths I just talked about, the MIPS path and the alternative payment models path. Within the APMs then, there are two major buckets of these alternative payment models that are relevant to the program. We have the advanced APMs, and again, that's where CMS is hoping to eventually get everyone participating in those advanced APMs. But there's also these non-advanced APMs. In this program, we typically refer to them as MIPS APMs. So you've got these advanced APMs and these non-advanced APMs, or MIPS APMs. So they fall under that APM track, but really, to me, to really fully understand this program, I think it's worth noting that this MIPS APM box really is better suited right here, in between the MIPS path and the alternative payment models path. And that's because if you're in that non-advanced APM, it's otherwise referred to as a MIPS APM, you are a MIPS provider. You are just in an alternative payment model. So you kind of bridge the gap between those two main paths. You kind of find yourself sort of in the middle, where you get some really awesome benefits for being a part of that MIPS APM, but you do find yourself still needing to participate in that MIPS track. So I would move MIPS APMs where that red star is in between. Overall, the QPP has some great goals, some fairly lofty goals, in like improving the beneficiary outcomes, reducing the burden on clinicians, increasing the adoption of those advanced APMs. Again, that's the overall long-term goal, is to get those clinicians to move from MIPS into advanced APMs. Improving data sharing and information sharing. That is a huge component of this, especially on the promoting interoperability side, which I'll talk about. For some additional information, you see that website down at the bottom there in red, qpp.cms.gov. That is CMS's main QPP website. There is a wealth of fantastic information there. I will be referencing some other pages that are within that website as well. So if you're not already familiar with that website, highly recommend you go there and start clicking around and do some investigating and some reading. There's some great resources there as well. All right, so what is MIPS? I mentioned it is the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System. It combines multiple legacy Part B programs that you're all probably fairly familiar with into a single program. So it took the Medicare EHR incentive program, otherwise known as Meaningful Use back in the day. It took that program, which sunsetted in 2016. I'll pause there, as I usually do on this slide, and just point out that the Medicaid Meaningful Use program is still alive and well. And it is now called the Medicaid Promoting Interoperability Program. It is really just meaningful use. It is moving into stage 3 this year. It has nothing to do with the MIPS track. So it is a completely separate program. There's a lot of monies to be captured there yet. If you have not already captured all the incentive monies there, there's no penalties for not participating in Medicaid promoting interoperability, but there are significant incentives, and I just encourage you to continue on that path if you can, and not forfeit any of the significant incentives there. So the Medicare program ended in 2016, and it has now been pulled into MIPS. It also pulled in the PQRS program, which also was sunsetting back in 2016. So that was the quality program that CMS had running for some time. That is now a part of the MIPS track. And then we have the value-based payment modifier program. It combined those 3 programs into this new program called MIPS. Within MIPS, there are 4 performance categories that you have to participate in if you're going to fully participate anyway. We have the quality performance category, and it's really just retooling the PQRS program. We have the cost category, which is really just retooling the value modifier program, or the cost side of the VM program. We have this performance category called promoting interoperability. It is what is left of the Medicare Meaningful Use program. So it's now called promoting interoperability, or PI. In the first year and second year, it was otherwise referred to as advancing care information. You might still see that term or the abbreviation ACI out there. Really, it's the PI category. So about a year ago, it underwent a name change. And then we have the improvement activities category, or IA. So overall, what you're trying to do then is, through each of those 4 performance categories, you get the best score that you can within that category, and then depending on that performance within that category, it's going to roll up into this MIPS final score. Ideally, what you're shooting for is a 100% or a final score of 100 for that MIPS final score. That is perfection. That's what you're shooting for. You probably won't get there, but that should be your goal. You want to get the best MIPS final score you can. That MIPS final score, as it relates to the annually set MIPS performance threshold, determines whether you're going to receive a positive, negative, or neutral payment adjustment on your Medicare Part B billings. I will note here that MIPS is budget neutral, and I'll talk about this on the back end of this a little bit more, but just note that what that means by calling the program budget neutral is that the folks that are getting incentivized, the ones that are getting a positive payment adjustment, are receiving that positive payment adjustment from those that are getting penalized. So as more people get penalized in this program, which is going to happen, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, we're going to see the top end positive adjustments grow more. General timeline, we are a few months into our 2019 performance period that opened on January 1st. It goes through the end of this year. Then we enter into the data submission period. It is typically about 3 months. Right now, the deadline for the 2019 year is March 31st of 2020, so you get about 3 months to get that data in. This year, CMS extended that deadline by a few days to April 2nd. They may or may not do that again. We saw that last year as well. So as of right now, you have to plan on getting your data submitted by March 31st. Then CMS provides some performance feedback after the data is submitted. So really, even as you're submitting that data, you're getting that performance feedback. And then clinicians will receive additional feedback before the start of the payment year. And then as we've seen with the legacy programs, there's always a 2-year lag between the performance year and the payment adjustment year. So what you're doing right now as of 2019, for the 2019 performance year, that's going to affect your Medicare reimbursements 2 years from now in 2021. So right now you're performing in 2019 to ensure you get the best Medicare reimbursement rate that you can in 2021. So how does CMS determine if I'm included in MIPS for the 2019 performance year? The very first step is determining if you're one of the MIPS eligible clinician types, and I will list out what those are. Then the next step is to look if those eligible clinicians exceed all 3 elements of what's called the low volume threshold, or LVT. And then if you meet or exceed all 3 elements, and I will talk about what those elements are, you're required to participate in MIPS at that individual level to avoid a penalty. So looking at the flip side, we just touched on briefly about that eligibility to get in the door. Looking at the other side of the coin, the exemptions, if you are newly enrolled in Medicare, so you just became credentialed to accept Medicare this calendar year, you're exempt from MIPS this program year. If you are below that low volume threshold, and I will expand upon what the LVT is, but if you are below the low volume threshold, you're also excluded from MIPS. And if you're participating, significantly participating in an advanced APM, you are also exempt from the MIPS track. And that last box is really just relating back to that other track. We have the MIPS track and the advanced APM track. So if you're in that advanced APM track and you have a significant patient volume coming through that, you'll find yourself excluded from MIPS as well. So what is a MIPS eligible clinician? They are both physicians and non-physician clinicians who are eligible to participate in MIPS. CMS defines who these clinician types are each year. We've seen the list expand as of this year, and I'll touch on who they are. But each year we're going to get a new definition for those clinician types. Being identified as a MIPS eligible clinician is that first step in determining whether you're required to participate in MIPS. Clinicians who are not considered a MIPS EC are excluded from MIPS. So here are the eligible clinicians for this year. The first 5 on the left-hand side are the ones we had in years 1 and 2. From clinical psychologists on, these are all new to us for this year. So the clinical psychologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, audiologists, registered dietitians or nutrition professionals are all now getting pulled into this program. They are now eligible clinicians for 2019. And as a general reminder, when you see the term physician, CMS That is a catch-all umbrella term that includes the MDs and DOs, but also doctors of dental surgery, dental medicine, podiatrists, optometrists, and chiropractors. So what is that low volume threshold? It's that second step. Once you determine that you are a MIPS eligible clinician type, then we look to see if you have, if you are billing sufficient volume of charges under the Medicare physician fee schedule, if you provide enough care to enough Medicare beneficiaries, and if you furnish an adequate amount of services to be included in MIPS. There are two MIPS determination periods that they use to measure the clinician against that low volume threshold, and I will touch on what those are in just a moment. And so if you exceed all three of the criteria, you're included in MIPS, and you're required to participate by submitting performance data. If you do not exceed all three criteria at the individual provider level, you are excluded from MIPS for that program year. You're excluded from mandatory participation in the program year. So here are the two determination periods. There are two 12-month periods that are aligned to the fiscal year. We have the historical period and the performance period. So for this year, the historical period that was used for 2019 has already passed. That ran from October 1st through 2017 through September 30th of last year. That determines your initial eligibility in MIPS. And if you're excluded during this initial run, that's not going to change based on whatever happens in the second determination period. You're going to maintain that status for this year if you find yourself excluded today. Then they look at the performance period, determination period to see where things are at for that second 12 months. So if you're included in the initial run, meaning you are eligible to participate as an individual in that initial run, you could actually find that you're excluded in this second run that is not yet completed. It's going to run through September 30th of this year. So if you are excluded in the first run, that won't change based on the performance period. But if you're included in that historical period, if you fall below that low volume threshold in the second performance period look back, then you will find that you are no longer eligible, or you are excluded from that mandatory individual participation. So here is that low volume threshold. For the first couple of years of the program, we had only two elements, elements 1 and 2, and now we've added a third one for this year. So the three elements are, element 1, you have to bill more than $90,000 a year in allowed charges for covered professional services under the Medicare physician fee schedule, and you must furnish covered professional services to more than 200 Medicare beneficiaries, and you have to provide more than 200 covered professional services under the physician fee schedule. So those are and statements, not or statements. To be pulled into the program, to find yourself where it's mandatory, you have to participate. All three of those are going to be true for you. You've billed more than $90,000 to Medicare. You have more than 200 patients in your patient panel, Medicare patients, and you have billed more than 200 covered professional services over that determination period as well. A covered professional service is defined as a single line on a claim with positive charges. So what are my reporting options if you're required to participate in MIPS? The only folks that are required to participate are those that are eligible at the individual level, meaning just their activity is looked at, and under their particular NPI and TIN tax ID number combination, they have exceeded that low volume threshold, all three elements. So that individual clinician would submit their data just under their TIN to CMS. You could also participate at the group level. A group is defined as 2 or more clinicians who have reassigned their billing rights to a single tax ID number. Or it can also be an APM entity. By an APM entity, that most often refers to an ACO. That is one of many types of alternative payment models out there, but it is the most prevalent one that we see. If you are in an ACO, you are locked into group participation. There is no way around that. And your group is the super group. It's the entire ACO. So in that model, all of the ACO participants, all of their data is rolling up into a single MIPS final score. And then the entire ACO participation list would all get the same Medicare reimbursement rate. But aside from the APM entity, the group, so a single practice can come together and participate as a group where you are adding all of your data together under those 4 performance categories and submitting a single data set to CMS for the entire group. And in that same way that I just talked about with the APM entity, all of the clinicians within your tax ID then would get the same MIPS final score. There is this other option called the virtual group. I think over time we'll see this option become more prevalent. Right now, I don't believe there are very many virtual groups out there. There is a application process that you have to go through with CMS in order to form a virtual group. But a virtual group, I think the easiest way to describe it is it's sort of like a mini ACO, in much the same way that ACO pulls together clinicians from multiple organizations to kind of work together in the program. A virtual group sort of does the same. It's made up of solo practitioners and very small practices of 10 or fewer clinicians. They come together virtually, no matter what that specialty or location, to participate in MIPS at that group level. So the virtual group then would add all of their data together and submit it to CMS, and then everyone in that virtual group would get the same score. So how does that low volume threshold then apply to groups? So CMS automatically conducts a similar look through each of those 2 determination periods to see if your group contains at least one MIPS eligible clinician type and collectively exceeds that low volume threshold. So the criteria doesn't change. You don't multiply that 90,000 in charges by the number of clinicians. It's the same 90,000 whether you're applying it against the individual clinician or against the group. So if your group has at least one MIPS eligible clinician and exceeds all 3 of those criteria, your group is eligible to participate in MIPS. So that is a way for a group of low volume clinicians who want to participate in MIPS to band together to overcome that low volume threshold together. So please note that participating in a group is completely optional. You do not have to participate at the group level. The only folks that must participate in the program to avoid a penalty are those that are individually eligible. Group participation is optional. So if you're excluded from MIPS as an individual, but eligible to participate as a group, you're not required to do so unless your tax ID or your practice opts to report at the group level. If they opt to report at the group level, then all of the eligible clinicians, even if they're excluded at the individual level, are now participating at that group level. So what happens if a clinician or group is excluded, but still wants to participate in MIPS in 2019? This is a new option. So if you're at all familiar with the first couple of years, this is new. So the first option was always there, however. So you could always voluntarily participate. Even if you weren't eligible at the individual level, you can still submit your data to CMS, and they're going to score it appropriately, and you're going to get some really good performance feedback on that. But you're not going to receive a MIPS payment adjustment regardless of that performance because you're just voluntarily participating. However, note that the data is still going to be publicly available on the Physician Compare website. That might be a reason to participate voluntarily. If you are unaware, the MIPS final scores are getting posted to the Medicare Physician Compare website. That is a place for patients to go and kind of shop around for high-quality, low-cost doctors. So if you are not eligible to participate, but you actually perform very well against the measures or the categories, and you can get a really nice MIPS final score, even though you're not going to get a payment adjustment, you might want to voluntarily participate because you want that score to appear on the Medicare Physician Compare website. Because you want patients to be able to see that you are high quality and low cost, and they may be more apt to seek you out for care. So now we have a new option that's coming live this year called opt-in. So if you're a MIPS eligible clinician type and you meet or exceed at least one of those 3 low volume threshold criteria, you may opt in to MIPS. That's different from voluntarily participating. If you opt in, you'll be subject to those MIPS program rules and the payment adjustments. Once made, if you do choose to opt in, you cannot revoke that opt-in for that single program year. So once you opt in, you are locked in, you will be included in the MIPS track for that program year. And you can opt in again next year if you would like. It is a single program year option. The details on how to opt in are still forthcoming from CMS. There is an opt-in fact sheet that you can grab from the QPP, qpp.cms.gov website. But the mechanism for actually opting in is not live yet. I suspect we will see that embedded within the login portion, like where folks are going to manually attest to activities. It is probably there that we are going to see this opt-in option come live, but CMS is still building that out. So more details to come. So where can I go to check my MIPS participation status? There's really two places where you can do that. The place where folks mostly go is to the participation lookup tool on the qpp.cms.gov site. I've got the link right there. Look for the QPP participation status window. You punch in an individual clinician's NPI. This does not work for group NPIs. It is individual ones only. But it will then tell you everything you need to know about that clinician. It actually, if you go to this site, it's going to tell you everywhere where that clinician is working as well. So every TIN, every organization they work for is going to show up. And it's going to show you whether they must participate at that organization or not. You could also go to the submission portal that's also within the qpp.cms.gov site. If you log in with your HARP access there, again, that's the same place you go to submit data to CMS if you're doing it yourself. If you log in there, you'll also see some participation status, and that's only going to be related to your single tax ID. And it'll also show all of your clinicians at one time. So I think some prefer that method versus the one that's on your screen right now, but either one of them work. And I've got a link there to the MIPS participation and eligibility fact sheet. So what happens if I am associated with multiple practices in the lookup tool? So if you bill Medicare through multiple organizations, you're required to participate in MIPS for each of those TIN and NPI combinations where you exceed that low volume threshold. So you could find yourself eligible to participate at one organization, but exempt from another organization. That's very common. And you're going to receive a payment adjustment based on the TIN NPI combinations where that low volume threshold was exceeded. And then any of the practices you work at where you did not exceed that low volume threshold or were otherwise excluded from MIPS, you would not receive that payment adjustment. So then you could very well find yourself receiving different MIPS final scores and subsequent payment adjustments at each organization that you bill under, and that's really most common. If you work at 5 different locations or 5 different organizations, you're going to participate in MIPS through each one of those organizations if you're eligible, and you're likely to get a different MIPS final score at each of those 5, and you'll get different reimbursement rates that then tie back to that MIPS final score. We've got some new terminology also that CMS gave to us this year. This is mostly related to the quality performance category. That's where it's most relevant. We've got something called a collection type, which is a set of quality measures with comparable specifications. This could be electronic clinical quality measures, MIPS clinical quality measures, qualified clinical data registry measures, Medicare Part B claims measures. So there's these different collection types. Submission type is the mechanism by which the submitter submits that data to CMS. That's the one I really want you to pay attention to, especially within the quality category. It's the terminology that really matters, and you'll understand why as we get a little bit deeper into this. And then we have the submitter type as well. So there's different ways to get that data to CMS. The way that you route that data to CMS is what that submission type is. I've got for individual clinicians reporting across the 4 performance categories. These are the different submission types, submitter types, and collection types for each one of the performance categories. So for quality, when it says submission type direct, that is really you are relying on a third-party intermediary that is either a registry is submitting your quality data for you, or your vendor is submitting it directly to CMS on your behalf. That's what direct means. There's login and upload, a very popular method to get the data to CMS. You don't have to rely on a third party to do it or pay a third party to do it. You can do it yourself. Login and upload is where you are extracting a file, a quality data file. It's otherwise known as it could be called a QRDA3 or possibly a JSON file that comes out of your EHR. You can get that from your vendor, or perhaps download it yourself right out of your EHR. You can submit that. You can log in and upload that file right to CMS. Small practices also have the ability to do Medicare Part B claims. A small practice is defined as 15 or fewer billing clinicians, not eligible clinicians. So don't just count your MIPS eligible clinician types. This looks at all of your billing clinicians. If you have 15 or fewer billing clinicians, you are considered a small practice, and you would be able to submit your quality data via the claims process. That is not an option for large practices this year. That is also a change. So you got those data submission options for groups then as well. It changes a little bit, especially on the quality side. They have something called the CMS web interface as well. And again, groups can also do Medicare Part B claims. That is also new this year. It was only available for individual clinicians previously. This year, groups can also submit Medicare Part B claims and be scored at that group level. But again, it is only for small practices, so 15 or fewer clinicians. So what exactly do you need to do then to perform in the MIPS program? So first, let's talk about the performance periods. So the performance period is the length of time that you or your group are required to report data for a particular MIPS performance category. So in order to receive the highest possible MIPS final score, you should report data for the minimum performance period under each performance category. I say minimum because for the promoting interoperability, especially with that category, it is a minimum of 90 days. So you can report anything from 90 all the way up to 365 days. And it sometimes makes sense to report more than 90 days to get a better score. You might find your clinician doing better on the PI measures by extending it to 91 days or 111 or maybe 204. It doesn't matter. Anything over 90 is going to work. And you want to manipulate that performance period to ensure that you're maxing out or you're getting the most points out of that category, because that's going to subsequently feed back into that MIPS final score and push that score higher too. Improvement activities is also a minimum of 90 days. Cost category and the quality category are a full 12 months of data. So we touched on this a little bit, the performance weights, the category weights. The weight then is that overall category value that feeds into that MIPS final score. The performance category weights have gradually increased or shifted over the last 3 performance years. This year, quality category is worth 45% of the MIPS final score. Cost category is worth 15%. Improvement activities is worth 15%. And promoting interoperability is also worth 25%. So for the 2022 performance year, when the program's been fully implemented, we're going to see quality and cost be weighted at 30% each. That's really the overall goal. We're going to, each year, the weight of the quality category is going to shrink until it gets down to 30%, at which point cost will pick up and will pick up the other 30%. I don't expect the performance category weights to shift at all for improvement activities or promoting interoperability. I think they will maintain at 15 and 25%. So we're going to dive into each one of the performance categories now. We'll touch on the quality performance category first. It's probably the most important category, not only because it's worth the most portion, the biggest portion of your MIPS final score, but it's also one of the most difficult ones to navigate and figure out how to report in. So there is a total of 257 CMS certified quality measures to choose from. But it's dependent on submission type. So we talked just a minute ago about those different submission types, whether it's claims data, could be through, you could be working through a registry, you could be working through your EHR. So not all of those 257 measures can be submitted via each one of those submission types. For instance, if you're reporting directly through your EHR, you don't have 257 quality measures to choose from. At most, you have 53. And a lot of you will look at that and say, "What? I only have like 9 or maybe 6 ECQMs, those electronic clinical quality measures, built right into the EHR." But in total, the most an EHR could offer is 53, because only 53 out of those 257 are available to be submitted through your EHR. So to fully report or to fully participate in this category, you're going to select and report on at least 6 individual quality measures. One of them must be an outcome measure or a high priority measure if an outcome is not available. And if less than 6 measures apply to the clinician or the group, you report on each applicable measure. It can often be difficult for specialties, especially. Some of the specialists have trouble finding 6 clinically relevant measures, depending on that specialty. CMS has tried to make it a little bit easier for the specialties to narrow down that big long list of quality measures to ones that are clinically relevant to them. So if you go to the QPP, the QPP.cms.gov site, you can navigate to these specialty-specific measure sets. But I advise you really to just use those as a general guide to kind of point you in the right direction towards a set of measures to look at. Through our own knowledge and through scoring, we have discovered that rarely are the specialty-specific measure sets the best option, regardless of your specialty. We often see specialties, any specialist, doing better by taking a more a la carte approach because anybody can report on any of the 257. You are not relegated to just your specialty-specific measure set. And you will do better, almost always do better, by splitting away from that measure set and maybe adding some additional measures to it. So then depending on your performance on that measure compared to the measure's benchmark, you're going to earn anywhere from 1 to 10 points for that measure. I've got a couple of resources there for you as well that you'll find very helpful, both the categories fact sheet and then the quality measure benchmarks. And you'll understand in just a moment why the benchmarks really, really matter. So there are also bonus points available. CMS wants your data. So to fully participate, you're submitting in those 6 measures, but you're going to get bonus points for additional measures. You get 2 points for every additional outcome or patient experience measure that you submit, regardless of the performance on it. You're really just submitting that additional measure data for these bonus points. So you'll get 2 for each additional outcome or patient experience measure. You get 1 point for other high priority measures. You get 1 point for each measure submitted using something called electronic end-to-end reporting. So several of those methods that you can submit the quality data to CMS are deemed electronic end-to-end reporting. And that what that really comes down to is that there's no human involved there who can manipulate that data or do anything to that data. For instance, EHR-based reporting is very much electronic end-to-end. You are either your vendor is submitting the data directly to CMS, or you are downloading a file and then uploading that file to CMS. That is electronic end-to-end reporting. Claims-based reporting, on the other hand, is a very manual process where your biller is just putting these quality data codes, otherwise known as G codes, on your claims. It's a very manual, human process that would not qualify for electronic end-to-end reporting. So you wouldn't get that bonus point for each one of those measures. We also have to consider data completeness. So CMS checks to see if you or your group have submitted data on a minimum percentage of patients that meet the quality measures denominator criteria. So in 2019, those thresholds have gone up a little bit. We are now at 60% of data submitted through qualified clinical data registries and other registries and the ECQMs. Also, those are measured against all payer data. For instance, when you are reporting through your EHR, that quality measure is being applied against 100% of your patients. It's not just looking at your Medicare patients. That quality measure doesn't care who the payer is. It's going to apply it to all of the applicable patients. You have to make sure that you're applying it to at least 60%. The good news is for those electronic clinical quality measures through your EHR, data completeness is always 100%. You can't tell your EHR to not apply that quality measure against an applicable patient. So for that, it's always 100%. It's also 60% for data submitted on Medicare Part B claims measures, and I think that's where this data completeness really comes into play. In this instance, you are only putting those codes on your Medicare Part B claims, but you have to ensure that you're doing it for at least 60% of the applicable patients for that measure as well. So if you forget or for some reason don't put that quality data code on at least 60% of the patients to which that measure applies, you're going to fall below that data completeness. If you violate data completeness, you're only going to earn 1 point for that measure. Except if you're in a small practice, if you're 15 or fewer clinicians, the floor on that is 3 points instead. Lots to unpack on this particular slide, but it's very important as you consider the quality performance category and how to get that best score possible. Picking the measures is not easy. There are a lot to choose from. Just from the CMS, the regular approved set, there's 257. It can be kind of a beast to go through those, especially when you're a specialty, to find ones that are clinically relevant. So you do that if you can. You might look at what's important what are the practice goals, or what's important to the clinician or aligns with those goals, and can you pick quality measures that align with those goals so that improvements that you're making practice-wide can then feed into those quality measures or vice versa. As I already mentioned, those specialty measure sets are rarely the best option. Another great place for specialists to go if they're struggling to find clinically relevant measures is to look at your specialty societies which you're members of and see if that specialty society has a registry that they are perhaps endorsing. So these registries can create and use their own customized CMS-approved measures. It's a process that they have to go through, but they can contact CMS and say, hey, we're an optometrist group, let's say, we've got this great registry, but we have built our own quality measures. CMS looks at what they've built, signs off on them being good enough to be pulled into this program, and then they can offer those very registry-specific measures to their participants. So that is a great option for specialists with limited measure options in that big set of 257. You might look to the registries who can create and use their own custom measures within the program as well. So once you go through and pick your 6 quality measures, you really need to do a deep dive into the data coming out of them. So low quality measure scores could be caused by a variety of issues. Unfortunately, you really can't trust the data coming out of your EHR. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. We see a widespread issues across most of the vendors out there where they are just misinterpreting the measures, they are not configuring them properly, or they're just downright broken. Just because your vendor is certified to offer you a particular quality measure does not mean they're calculating it correctly. I know how silly that sounds, but I'm telling you it is true. Just because it's certified doesn't mean they're doing it right. You've really got to do a deep dive into those numerators and denominators and drill down to that patient level to determine if it's calculating properly. Sometimes you're going to find that patients are not in the numerator that should be, and it's really because the vendor has something wrong in their system. You have to work with that vendor to get it corrected, and then it's going to start calculating correctly. There's also configuration issues. So a lot of these measures don't work correctly right out of the box. When you get it from the vendor or start to implement it, there's often some configuration that has to be done behind the scenes, potentially to link LOINC codes to different diagnoses and whatnot. So there's data that quality measure to work properly is going to look across your database and look for specific structured data. If If it is not linked properly to those different structured data fields, the measure could break and you're not getting the quality measure credit that you should be. Data entry issues. We're all human. Everybody makes mistakes. We all have the greatest of intentions to do our jobs perfectly, but none of us do. We all make mistakes. So you really have to also be watching your staff, the folks that are charting in that EHR, both the clinicians as well as your MAs, whoever's putting that clinical data in that's related to that quality measure. You got to ensure that they're doing it exactly right. Again, it comes back to that structured data. Each one of those quality measures is looking for a particular data field for a value or for some sort of information. If your staff are not using that structured data field, they're putting that data somewhere else in the EHR, it's going to break the quality measure. You're not going to get the quality measure credit that you're looking for. So once you've gone through all three of those, you've looked into vendor issues, all is well, configuration issues, all is well, and your staff and clinicians are using the EHR appropriately, there's no data entry issues, then you can start to trust the data coming out of your EHR, and you could actually determine whether you have quality issues. But you really can't just take that data at face value until you look for vendor issues, configuration issues, and data entry issues. So data submission types really, really matter under the quality performance category. As I mentioned, not all of the measures can be submitted via all of the different submission types. So picking and choosing your quality measures really relates back to those submission types as well. How are you going to piece it together? We had a really nice change to make this a little bit easier this year. Last year, you had to submit all of your quality measures via a single submission type. You can now pick and choose. You could submit one quality measure via claims. You could submit one quality measure via your EHR and submit the remaining 4 through a registry. So it makes it a little bit easier. You can pick and choose, but that data submission type really matters. And it really matters also because of the benchmarks. And I'll talk about that a little more on the next slide as well, but the benchmarks vary by submission type. So if a single quality measure can be submitted via the EHR, via a registry, and via claims, each one of those submission types is going to get a different benchmark, and that's really going to matter. And I'll expand on that on the next slide. I'm also going to touch more on the topped-out measures, but from a high-level view, a topped-out measure indicates a measure where the best and worst performers are all doing relatively well. Meaning there's no longer a significant difference between the highest and lowest performers on a particular measure. We see that happen with measures over time as folks get better and better with those measures. Even the worst performers are now at the top of the scale. So that means it's topped out. And if it's topped out long enough for a few years, it's going to be significantly topped out. If it's significantly topped out, you can no longer earn 10 points for that measure. It gets capped at 7. So both that data submission type and the topped out measures can make a massive difference in your quality category score. So let's touch on the benchmarks first, and I'll kind of explain what's happening here. I know there's a lot of numbers here, it's sort of color-coded to follow along, but look at the very top, it says your performance rate of 62. We're looking at one single quality measure. It's quality measure 110. Preventative care and screening. This is actually a slide from a few years ago, but it's still relevant to the concept of benchmarks today. So that particular measure can be submitted via claims, via EHR, and via the registry. So that performance rate of 62 is going to translate to different points relative to that submission type. So let's look at claims-based reporting first. It's in green there. You can kind of follow along on the math formula there if you want to, but if you look at that total awarded points, it's that performance rate of 62, when you follow it down to the benchmark, falls into decile 5, and more specifically, it's going to award you 5.96 points for a performance rate of 62 via claims. But look at that middle one, EHR-based reporting. Different benchmarks for that particular submission type. And that same performance rate of 62 translates to 8.9 points. And then registry kind of falls somewhere in the middle. That exact same performance rate. So across these different submission types, nothing has changed in terms of quality. The clinicians are doing the exact same thing. All you've done is gotten the data to CMS a different way. As you can see, that same performance rate can have a wide range of point values depending on that submission type. So multiply that 6 times over, and you can see that that submission type can have a massive effect. You could see a 20 or 30 point swing even in that quality category score just based on that submission type. So it really, really matters. You got to pay close attention to that and ensure that the way that you are reporting that data to CMS is the way that's going to earn you the best points possible. So touching on the issue of topped-out measures, ultimately you need to avoid them if you can. It's nearly impossible to do so, but you should at least try and limit the number of topped-out measures, and I'll touch on why. Because many of them are topped out, but they're not yet capped at 7. So obviously the ones that are capped at 7 points, try to avoid those if you can, because you can no longer earn the 10 points for each of those. They're capped at 7. But a lot of them are topped out, but not yet capped. So this is a little screenshot of the benchmarks file, looking at several quality measures that you can see in the red circle. They're not yet capped at 7 points, but they are topped out. I think over time we will see these ones become capped, but as of today, for this year, you could still earn 10 points, but look at all the scoring options that are missing there. So that first one, measure 5, it's a registry measure. Look at the deciles. We've got deciles 3, 4, and 5 there, but then there's no way to earn 6, 7, 8, 9 points there. Almost perfection at a performance rate of 99.99% is still going to only earn you 5 points. You have to be absolutely perfect at 100% to get to that 10th decile and earn 10 points. So you can see where just one small error on one patient could significantly undercut your quality score for these measures that are topped out but are not yet capped. It could be very difficult to get to that 10 points. And then, although not yet topped out, scoring options may still be limited. Look at those options there at the bottom. I've got a couple of them called out, measure ID 389 and 398. These are both also registry measures, but they're not yet topped out. See on the far right there, they're neither capped at 7 and they're not topped out, but this one's starting to get topped out. And this is what we see with those measures as they begin to reach that topped out status, is we start to lose scoring options. So there's a lot of potholes in this road. It's near impossible to avoid topped out measures, but the more you avoid them, I think the better chance you have of getting a good quality score, because we're not missing those important scoring options on the top end of the scale. All right, we'll roll into the cost performance category. It's worth 15% of your MIPS final score. There's no reporting requirement, so the info is pulled right from the claims data. There's nothing else that you have to submit to them. CMS is going to measure you on a few different cost measures this year. We have the MSPB, or Medicare Spending per Beneficiary measure, and the Total Per Capita Cost measure, or TPCC. And then there's also 8 new additional episode-based measures that they are scoring everybody on who they can this year. And I'll touch on those on the next slide. I'll list them out. In order to be scored on a cost measure, the individual clinician or group must have enough attributed cases to meet or exceed that minimum case volume for that particular cost measure. So that's a big part of it. A lot of the cost measures are not applicable to clinicians, especially when you're looking at those 8 episode-based ones. They're very specific to some specialties. But even the other 2, the MSPB and the TPCC, they often don't apply because clinicians don't have enough attributed patients. So if any of the cost measures do apply to you or your clinicians, those measures that do apply will be the ones that are used to calculate the entire cost category score. And then if no cost measures apply, which does happen, it's more frequent than you would expect, where none of those 10 measures apply to a particular clinician, often based off the attribution. If none of them apply, then we'll see that 15% shift back over to quality. So quality wouldn't be worth 45%, it would be worth 60% instead. A couple of really important resources there to get you started. I highly recommend, if you want to understand these measures, you want to grab those two resources there and read through them. These are the 8 episode-based measures that they're using this year. As you can see, they're very specific to certain clinicians. Then there's some additional cost category resources there. I will say there is an issue with the first one, that cost measure information forms. I was alerted to this issue earlier today. That link is broken. For some reason, CMS has something wrong with that resource. I've submitted a ticket to CMS to figure out why we can't access that particular resource. But if you click that link, you'll probably get an error message right now. But hopefully CMS will have that up and running. If you really want to get your hands on that cost measure information forms resource, I have a local copy saved to my system before that link broke. So if you email me afterward, I'm happy to send you that particular resource. So now that I've gone through 2 of the categories, we just talked about quality, we just talked about cost. I want to pause here before we get to the other 2 categories, PI and improvement activities, and talk about this new facility-based scoring option that is new for 2019. I think this is going to be a really great option for facility-based clinicians because they traditionally have difficulty scoring well in the MIPS program because they're facility-based, meaning they're doing the vast majority of their work in hospitals, let's say, or other facilities. So this new great facility-based scoring option is now coming live in 2019. It allows certain clinicians to have their quality and cost category scores based off of the hospitals at which they work. It's not applicable to clinicians who are participating in a MIPS APM. Otherwise, one example of a MIPS APM would be an ACO. So if you're in an ACO, this option is not an option for you. But if you're not in a MIPS APM, then you could see this facility-based scoring option be a fantastic option for you this year. So I've got the applicability there. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through those. You can see what it means to be a facility-based clinician or a facility-based group. Then a facility-based clinician is attributed to the hospital where they provide provide services to the most patients. So if you work at 2 different hospitals, you'll be attributed to the hospital that you provide the most services to. Same thing in the group. They're going to look across the group and attribute to the hospital where the most facility-based clinicians are attributed. And then this is dependent on your facility or your hospital participating in something called the VBP, or Value-Based Purchasing Program. The hospital must be getting a VBP score because that is where that quality and cost category information is going to flow down to you. So if that hospital doesn't get a VBP score, you would not be able to participate in this facility-based scoring option. So CMS is automatically going to apply this new scoring option to any clinician who they can and would benefit from it. And I'll talk about, that might be kind of scary at first, but I'll talk about why this is a really great thing that they're doing. So if they can score you under this new scoring option, they are going to look to it to do it from you. But they'll only do it if they'll only award you that score if you would benefit from it. And I'll talk about that on a couple slides from now, what I mean there. So there's no submission requirements for an individual who wants to be facility-based measured on this new scoring option. At the individual level, if CMS can score you against this new option, they're going to. But if a group would like to be scored against a facility-based, you've got to somehow alert CMS that you want to be assessed at the group level under this new option. And you would do that by submitting either the improvement activities at the group level or you're promoting interoperability performance category data at that group level. That would alert CMS then to look at that group level facility-based scoring as well. So this gets a little weird in terms of the measurement. There's a little misalignment, let's say, between the performance years between the hospital VBP program and the MIPS program. So for that facility-based measurement, the measure set for the fiscal year hospital VBP program that begins during the applicable MIPS performance period would be used for the facility-based clinicians. So what that means is, for 2019, for MIPS, if you're going to fall back on this facility-based scoring, that would that performance period wouldn't start for the hospital until October 1st of this year, and it would run through September 30th of 2020. That's the score that would feed back into your 2019 MIPS performance period for quality and cost. I've got another fact sheet there. I highly recommend, if you're interested in learning more about the facility-based measurement, grab that fact sheet there. They did a nice job of kind of laying it out for you. So assigning MIPS category scores, that quality and cost performance category scores, which are separate scores for facility-based clinicians, are based on how well the clinician's hospital then performs in that VBP program. And some hospitals don't receive a total performance score in a given year in that program, whether due to insufficient quality data, just failure to meet program requirements. There's other reasons too, where the hospital might just fall short and not get a VBP score. If that happens, then you obviously would not be able to be scored under this new scoring option. So we talked about how CMS is automatically going to do this for every clinician that they can, but they're only going to apply it if it's beneficial to the clinician. And that's kind of relating back to this, this box here at the bottom. So to give MIPS eligible clinicians the greatest opportunity for success, if a clinician who is facility-based decides to submit data for the quality performance category as an individual, group, or virtual group, they're only going to apply facility-based measurement if that is the better of the two. So they're automatically going to score you on facility-based if they can, but if you also submit quality data to CMS, then CMS is going to look at both data sets. They're going to look at the hospital's score for that quality and cost, and they're going to look at what you've independently submitted as well. And they're going to award your clinician with the better of the two. So that's why I think this is a fantastic option, because I think, especially with these facility-based clinicians, a lot of them really struggle to do well in the quality category, or really can't even get to their quality data because it's locked into the hospital system. If that's the case, you can fall back on that facility-based score to get a good quality and cost score. However, if you also do have access to your quality data, submit that as well, and then CMS is going to award you with the better of the two. I think this is a fantastic option that a lot of people will take advantage of this year. All right, improvement activities. It's worth 15% of the MIPS final score. You've got 118 activities to choose from this year. Many of the activities originally came out of the patient-centered medical home model. Previously implemented activities, including those that you've used in prior MIPS years, they do count. As long as you still have it implemented, you can continue to attest to the exact same improvement activities year after year. Just keep them in place for a minimum of 90 days each calendar year. Each activity is worth either 10 points for medium weight or 20 points for high weight, unless you are in a small practice or a non-patient facing clinician or clinicians located in rural or health professional shortage areas. Those values are doubled. So the medium are worth 20 and the high are worth 40. You select an activity and you test yes to having implemented it for at least 90 continuous days in the performance year, and you're going to earn 40 points to receive full improvement activity category score. So a small practice clinician can attest to a single high weight activity, and they're going to max out this category. They're going to earn those 440 points within the category, which then translates to the full 15 points in the MIPS final score. Promoting interoperability, we see a major change in this category from previous years. So if you are at all familiar with this category from the first couple of years, you're going to want to understand how it's changed this year. Ultimately, it's a great change in terms of measuring performance, but I think overall we're going to see a slight dip in everybody's PI scores this year. It is worth 25% of that MIPS final score. You do have to be on 2015 edition of your EHR this year. So if you are still on your 2014 edition EHR, you want to be working with your vendor to ensure that they can get you upgraded to 2015 no later than October 3rd of this year. Why October 3rd? Because that is the beginning of that last 90-day period for the year that you want to make sure you must be on that 2015 edition technology for the full 90 days. Everything is based off the performance now. We in previous years have had the base score and the performance score. The base score is now gone. Everything is all off performance now, and that's why I think we're going to see a dip of like 15 or maybe 20% in everybody's PI scores. So while this category is based off the former Medicare Meaningful Use Program, it is now very, very different. We were left with only 4 objectives. They've really stripped away the vast majority of the measures that we were working on under meaningful use. What we're left with now is e-prescribing, health information exchange, provider-to-patient exchange, and public health and clinical data exchange. A couple of great resources there for you as well. But these are the measures that are contained within those. So within e-prescribing, there are 3 measures, e-prescribing and 2 bonus measures that are related to the opioid crisis. Health information exchange has 2 measures. There's a new one here that you may not be familiar with. Up to this point, we've been electronically sending those summaries of care to that next provider of care. There's now a second measure that is now measuring the ones coming to you. So you are receiving, you're requesting those summaries of care for your patients coming to you. So any patients transferring into your care or patients that are new to your care, you're going to get credit for reaching out and trying to get your hands on a summary of care. Provider-to-patient exchange, formally provide patient access. Really, this is the patient portal measure. When you are providing that timely access to your patients for their medical information, you're scoring points. You want to ensure that your front desk staff or back end, the checkout staff, whoever it is who is supposed to be offering that patient portal to every single patient, you want to make sure that they're doing that. It's a good way to score 40 points if you offer it to 100% of your patients. And then public health and clinical data exchange. You have to be actively engaged with any 2 registries that fall under these 5 different categories. You'll note that the security risk analysis, or SRA, is missing from above. It is still mandatory. It is a requirement in this program. It's just no longer a scoring measure. In previous versions, you got 10 points for doing your SRA. You do not get 10 points, but you will get 0 points in the whole PI category if you do not conduct or review your SRA each year. So it is still mandatory. We will never get away from that annual requirement. So to earn a score in the PI category, you must use that certified technology for the full 90 days. There's a couple of information blocking attestation statements and the ONC direct review statement you have to say yes to. You have to attest yes to having completed or reviewed your SRA, and then report on all of the measures under each of those categories. It says report on the required measures. That really just leaves off the 2 bonus measures for the opioid crisis. You don't have to report on those, but you must report on the others. You're either submitting a yes or no, or submitting at least a 1 in the denominator to fulfill those required measures. And then the scores for each of those measures are added together to calculate the category score. And if the exclusions are claimed, some of those PI measures have exclusions built into them, such as the HIE measures. If you do claim those exclusions, just know that you don't lose those points. Those points get rolled into or added to or allocated to the other measures that are left. Reweighting is possible. There's 2 ways to be reweighted: automatic reweighting and application-based reweighting. By reweighting, what I mean there is the 25% that would normally be attributed to the PI category. If you are reweighted, that moves over to quality. So quality is worth 70% and PI would be worth 0. It is automatic reweighting for non-patient-facing clinicians, hospital-based clinicians, ambulatory surgical center, and then really all of the MIPS EC provider types except the MDs and DOs. None of them have to do promoting interoperability, but they all can if they would like to under the automatic reweighting. Any of those automatically reweighted clinicians, if they do choose to submit promoting interoperability data, either at the individual or group level, they will be scored accordingly and they will receive a PI score. It often makes sense to do so as well. A lot of those nurse practitioners in particular performed very, very well under the meaningful use program if they participated on the Medicaid side. And so they are well versed in those meaningful use workflows, and you'll find those nurse practitioners often doing very well on the PI measures. So it might make sense to submit that data because they're doing so well, they're going to max out that category. And it might be easier to score well in the PI category than it is under quality. There's also an application-based reweighting for different reasons, acts of God, your practice burned down, whatever it is. Hopefully none of that applies to you, but if it does, and you just can't participate in the PI category, you can apply to have that reweighted as well. if your EHR is not going to get 2014 certified or 2015 certified, if maybe they've stalled out in 2014, there are a lot of vendors that are choosing not to go for that next level of certification. If you find yourself with one of those EHRs, you would not be able to participate in PI. So instead of taking a 0 under PI, you'd want to apply for the application-based reweighting to get that shifted over to quality instead. And if you're in a small practice, 15 or fewer clinicians, you can automatically get and be approved for that reweighting as well. Performance thresholds and payment adjustments. What does it all mean? So as I mentioned, you're building that MIPS final score. You want to ensure that that MIPS final score at least is over the annually set performance threshold. This year in 2019, that minimum threshold is 30 points. So you've got to be at least there to avoid a negative payment penalty. And then the better the score, the better that reimbursement rate. Anything over 75 points puts you into the exceptional performance threshold, where there's some additional monies that are set aside to reward those top performers. So CMS compares your MIPS final score to that performance score and then determines your reimbursement rate accordingly. For this year, those payment adjustments could be up to 7% or as low as -7% for that 2021 payment year. But remember, this is a budget neutral program. So that meaning that the folks that are getting penalized are paying for those that are getting incentivized. So to ensure that budget neutrality, those MIPS payment adjustments are likely to be decreased or maybe increased, but not yet, by an amount called a scaling factor. So the amount of that scaling factor depends on the distribution of those final scores. So really what it comes down to is right now, because that performance threshold is so low, we are not getting enough people getting penalized to pay out that maximum top end. So we're not going to see anyone's reimbursement rates jump up 7% this year. Even if you got a MIPS final score of 100, you're not going to see a 7% increase because of the scaling factor. We don't have enough people getting penalized yet. Let's look back to the year one, where it was supposed to be as much as a 4% gain. The scaling factor took that back to 1.88% because it was so easy to avoid that penalty that almost nobody got penalized. So as that performance threshold increases, so will the number of penalized participants, which in turn will provide more funds to pay out to those exceeding that minimum performance threshold. Eventually, we'll see some really nice top-end gains. So kind of breaking it down, you can see the green box there in the middle, that minimum payment adjustment. You can see, depending on your score, what that's going to mean. You really ultimately want to be over that 75 points. It's for a couple of reasons. So that performance threshold is incrementally increased each performance year. We are still in what's called the transition years of the program, but by 2022 performance year, that minimum performance threshold is going to be based on the mean or median of the final scores for all of the MIPS eligible clinicians who participate in 2021. So this means, based on what we're seeing already today, and with the average scores that are coming out of the program, by 2022, that minimum performance threshold is probably going to be somewhere in the range of 70 to 85 points. That's the minimum score you're going to have to attain just to avoid a payment penalty. That's when we're going to see some big top-end gains here. That's when we're going to see 9% or even 18% gains, because a lot of providers are going to take a penalty there. Even ones that are trying their hardest to do well are not going to be able to overcome that minimum threshold. So as of 2022, participants will need to achieve scores that are today considered exceptional performance just to avoid a Medicare payment penalty. So if you are a clinician who is doing the bare minimum right now, that you only intend to shoot for 30 points because you just want to do the bare minimum, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Because if you are not shooting for the moon, trying to get the best score you can right now, where if you fail, you don't get penalized, you're going to find yourself in hot water in a few years, because you are going to have to be what is considered an exceptional performer right now, or you are going to get a payment penalty. Don't be in that bucket. Getting started checklist, some things you can do in the interest of time. As I see, I have once again talked through my full 75 minutes. You can look at this at your leisure. I want to touch on really quick about the free support that's out there for everybody. If you are at all struggling in this program, please stop doing it on your own. CMS is paying a lot of organizations like Altarum to be out there helping you. So you do not have to do this on your own. You can, if you are a small practice clinician, 15 or fewer clinicians, you can work with us for free. Click on that link at the bottom, qppresourcecenter.org, and click the Join Now button. That's going to interface you with our portal. It's also going to give you access to something called MIPS, which is our own proprietary scoring tool that we built to kind of mimic what CMS is doing on their side. It's really a sandbox for you to play in. It is very difficult to figure out how you're going to score, but MIPS makes it super easy. It's also very hard to figure out what quality measures you should be reporting on. Again, MIPS makes this ridiculously easy. You feed us that data, you upload that file into MIPS, and within seconds, it is going to tell you your best 6 measures by the best reporting method possible. It is a very, very valuable tool that is free to you if you are in a small practice. If you're in a large practice, you can still gain that access as well. It may not be free for you, but we're happy to give everybody access to that MIPS tool. It is also a qualified registry this year. So what that means is, as of 2019, we can actually submit your data for you to CMS. So once you decide what that best data set is by manipulating the different variables within MIPS this year, we'll be able to pass that data on to CMS for you. And so you are done. Once you decide on that, you leave it to us. We're going to submit that data to CMS on your behalf, and you're good for the year. So a lot of great benefits to working under the QPP Resource Center. So if you're struggling, please stop struggling on your own. Work with one of the many fantastic organizations that are across the country that are ready and willing to help you with this program. I've got a quick poll question here as we wrap up. CMS makes us, as part of our funding, they, one second while I launch this. They ask us to see how satisfied you are with the information. So that is up and live right now. If you would please tell me how satisfied you are with today's presentation, with 5 being very satisfied, 1 being very dissatisfied. Would appreciate this feedback. Again, this just is fed up to CMS. They are funding us. They're paying us to be out there helping you, and they want to make sure that we're doing a very good job. So I'll leave that open for just another moment. I appreciate you giving those. We are ready to close. Thank you, everybody. And with that, I don't know that I had any good questions come in, and I've kind of talked a few minutes past anyway. But my very last slide is questions and how to get to us. So I didn't really get any great questions on here, but if you come up with any questions, you've got my email, my phone. You've got the QPP Resource Center. We've got an email address. That QPP info gets you to our main bank of my colleagues who are ready and waiting to answer your questions as well. So I thank you for your time today. If we can help you in any way, shape, or form with this, if you're looking for help, if you're a large practice, you don't know where to go, just give me a call, shoot me an email. I will direct you to whoever is out there and who's ready to help you through this program. So again, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to seeing you again on a future webcast, and have a good night.